It's good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millsy, back with Hometown Commander, back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I take my first pass at the Commander for us on a budget on my quest out brew the magic world. You know the motto, baby. It's ABB, always be brewing, and that's what we're back to do today. The deck list is going to be down in the description for you below, as well as I'd really appreciate if you could interact with the video, like, comment, subscribe, consider check out those links in the description. I'd appreciate it. But today, we're circling back to a commander of old and a favorite of one of my buddies because I thought it had gotten enough support over the last few sets to finally go back and take another look. And today we're talking about Rocco Street Chef. A 3-mana Naya commander from way back in March of the Machine, the Aftermath. This is the beginning of our end step. Each player is going to exile the top card of their library. Until our next end step, each player can play the cards exiled that way, but whenever a player plays a land or casts a spell from exile, we get to put a counter on a creature we control and make a food. Rocco, and it works in two different veins. One, it's going to entice your opponents to play the things that you let them exile. And if they do, we get to put a counter on something and make a food. Now, the intention of us doing that is to try to take advantage of us getting the counter and the food over whatever our opponents exiled. And that's half right the goal of the deck. But the other is we can play things from exile, including our own card that we exiled, and get things on our own. So we kind of want to balance these together, kind of get the things from when our opponents do it, and play our own things from exile other things to again make this happen. Make the counters matter, make the foods matter. That's basically the goal: is can we profit from both of them enough to make it worth it? But I want to say a quick thank you to the channel members. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. And if you're interested in seeing all of our videos just a little bit earlier for just $1 a month, consider checking it out down below and supporting the channel. Okay. Playing from exile is a really interesting idea in Commander, and there's a lot of ways we can look at it. You have something like Quintorius Canned, which is just going to profit every time we cast a spell from exile, dealing 2 to everybody, and we gain 2. Now, he does give us a way to cast something from exile, because his -3 lets us discover 4. Remember, discover is kind of like Cascade. The difference is we're going to exile cards from the top until we hit a non-land spell with mana value 4 or less, and we get the choice. We can either cast it for free, or we can put it into our hand. And that's interesting. There's a lot of interesting pieces in our deck with mana value 4 or less, so that's a pretty relevant ability. You can also make some tokens, but I think the -3 is probably the thing that we can use with Contourus when we need to. Otherwise, I think just trying to take advantage of us casting our own things from exile is going to hopefully get some damage in our opponents. Bonehorde Dragosaur is going to exile the top 2 cards of our library at the start of our turn. We can play them this turn. If we exile a land, we get a dinosaur token. If we exile non-land, we get a treasure. The whole point is we're putting more things in exile to try to cast to trigger Rocco. Faldorn says whenever we cast a spell from exile or a land entered from exile, we get to make a wolf, and then we can tap her and pitch a card to, exile the top card and play it this turn. Again, trying to take advantage of that static ability to make the wolves right as we're doing our own thing. Lelia says whenever it attacks, we get to exile the top card of our library and we can play it this turn. But whenever one or more of our cards are put into exile from our library or our graveyard, we get a counter on Lelia. So every end step when Rocco is exiling one of our cards, Leila's getting counters. When she attacks, she's getting counters, and hopefully just growing to be a nice threat. Party Thrasher, which has been, in my opinion, one of the better ads that Rocco's gotten in the last few sets, being all the way back in Mono Horizons 3, says that all of our non-creature spells we cast from exile have Convoke. And this is interesting because we have ways to make tokens with these things, and they can help tap to help us cast these spells from exile. And then the beginning of our pre-combat main phase, we can pitch a card. If we do, we exile the top 2, and we can play one of them this turn. Pianalar lets us get a Thopter whenever we play land from exile or cast a spell from exile. So again, going a little bit wide, right, as we're doing what we want to be doing. Plarg and Nassari are kind of interesting. At the beginning of our upkeep, each player exiles cards from the top of their library until they hit a non-land card. An opponent chooses one that was exiled this way, and we could cast up to 2 of the other ones without paying their mana cost. So opponents could take the best one probably away. We get 2 of the other ones, free casts from exile, and all the profit that comes with it. Urabrask says at the beginning of our upkeep, we exile the top card of our library, and we could play it this turn. So the goal here is to basically always be playing something from Exile because our draw is going to Exile. But it also says at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, the next time they would draw, they exile it instead, and they can play it from Exile. So again, try to get those Exile triggers right on all of our things. Wild Magic Sorcerer gives all of our spells from Exile Cascade. Remember, Cascade, it's like Discover, but it's a little different. So Cascade, you exile till you hit a non-land permanent that costs less than that mana value, and it's either play it or put it back on the bottom. So very interesting ability, but again, very useful just to get more spells from Exile. Because remember, you're cascading, you're going to cast it from Exile. Ubamask said if a player would draw a card, they remove that card from the game face up instead, and each player can play cards removed from the game with Ubamask. Again, basically forcing your opponents to exile instead of draw and try to play everything from Exile to trigger Rocco again and again. And he joins up, is just going to try to trigger Rocco multiple times. Note that Any Joins Up will double both of Rocco's triggers. Everybody will get 2 cards at our end step because of Rocco's first trigger, and we will get 2 counters and 2 foods with his bottom ability. So Any Joins Up is really great for that. Charred Foyer is interesting. I can exile the top card of our library every turn and we could play it, but I think what we really care about is Warp Space, allowing us to pay 0 for the first spell we cast from exile every turn, right? Making those things cheaper. Passionate Archaeologist, dealing damage to target opponent for each spell we cast from exile. It's mana value. And then Showdown of the Skalds comes in, exiles the top 4 of our library. Until the end of our next turn, we can play those cards. And then lines 2 and 3, whenever we cast a spell, we get to put a counter on one of our creatures. Again, the important thing is trying to take advantage of all those cards we exiled, right, and getting Rocco's abilities. I think we want to care about the counters. Rocco's going to hand them out, and I think we could try our best to just make sure we're putting them in the right position. Things like a Nimpakal can make tokens on attack, depending on the number of counters it has. We could start making a Gnome army with that. Champion of Lambhold gets a count every time a creature comes in, and creatures with power less than her power can't block our creatures. So the bigger Lambhold is, effectively, the more unblockable our board is. Generous Bup says whenever a counter's put on it, we put a counter on each other creature we control, and this happens once per turn. Pup is almost one of the best targets we have for Rocco's ability, because then if everyone plays something from exile in their turn, we're getting a counter on all of our creatures every turn, and that's pretty great, just raising the floor of the board. Or a Boar Raid, right? That new card from Edge of Eternities. Whenever we start combat, we put a counter equal to its power on all of our creatures. Again, another thing that you could put counters on, just to, again, raise the floor of your board. Shalayan Halar, whenever one of our counters are put on something, it deals that much damage to target opponents. So you can start pinging some damage out. Also works really well when we start doubling or enabling, more counters to be put on. Warden of the Grove is another interesting one. Whenever a non-token creature comes in, we get our choice. We can either put X counters on it or make an XX Spirit, where X is the number of counters on Warden of the Grove, and it gets a token on the beginning of each of our end steps. This is really interesting because I think there's some games where you're going to want the counters. There's some games where you're going to want the spirits, and it just adds some nice, flexibility for what you're trying to do. Of course, you're running the hardened scale style abilities to, more counters going on instead. Sphere Grid can put a counter on a creature whenever it hits a player, but mainly it's used for that bottom ability to give all of our creatures reach and trample as long as they have a counter on them. And then Damning Verdict, we can destroy all creatures with no counters on them. So we can get enough counters spread out, we can really take advantage of a nice one-sided board wipe into our opponents. Terra Symbiosis is at minimum going to draw us 1 card per turn, hopefully. Whenever you put 1 or more counters on a creature we control, we can draw that many cards, do this once per turn. Note that, again, this can go off on everybody's turn, because if somebody casts from exile and Rocco's out, a counter goes on and we can draw. And then Uncivil Unrest gives all of our non-token creatures Riot, so they come in, they have their choice of a counter or haste, and whenever a creature we control with a counter on it would deal damage to a permanent or player, deals double that damage instead. So again, pass the counters around and really take advantage of it. Again, I like that the Riot gives an option for all of our creatures just to come in with one. We're also making food tokens, and I think there's a lot of ways we can care about the food tokens. I mean, there's obvious things like Gilded Goose, which can sack those foods to make a mana of any color. Jaheira lets them all tap for a green, allowing them to really take advantage of some mana for us, right? Otherwise, they can't do that normally. Balin can allow us to tap them to either get mana, draw cards, grow itself. There's some fun options with Balin if we have a bunch of food laying around. Ginny Fae can actually allow us to bring those foods in as either cats or dogs if we want to, which is a really interesting ability and matters more than you think it does. There's a world where maybe you don't want the food, but you really want more creatures, and you can really take advantage of that. Peregrine Took says whenever you make one or more tokens, you make those tokens plus another food and can sack foods to draw cards. Again, you know, you only need one or two Rocco triggers to start drawing cards with Peregrine Took, and we've got some more ways to take advantage of Peregrine Took. The new Raygost can tap to sack a food to deal 3 damage to each opponent. And at the beginning of each end step, if we gain life, we can untap it. Again, just an interesting way to deal some damage for those foods that are laying around. Rosie Cotton says whenever we create a token, we can put a counter creature we control other than Rosie. We'll come back to that one. We got some fun combos we can do with that. Stride Hanger says if we make one or more artifact tokens, we make that many plus an additional Thopter and buffs all of our Thopters. So now we're getting more creatures as we're making our foods. Ocean Dissident says whenever an artifact comes into our control, we can put a counter on our creature we control. So again, each of those foods basically turns into another counter, right, that we're putting on our board, which is pretty profitable. Rampage of the Clans can basically destroy all of our foods and make us a 3/3 centaur for each of them. It's a really interesting way to either do it defensively to get a bunch of blockers or like do it right before our turn for like a bunch of centaur attackers. It's just a really interesting card, and I think it could really pay off depending on when we use it. Nuka-Cola Vending Machine, we'll talk about in a second, being a fun combo piece. But whenever you sacrifice a food, you make a tapped treasure. So, if we use our foods for abilities or something like that, we can get a treasure out of it. It can also make a food with its ability. And then Night of the Sweet's Revenge, whenever it comes in, you make a food. All your foods can tap for a green mana. And then you can pay 7 and sack it to give all your creatures +X till end of turn. Or X the number of foods you control. Very interesting ability, but mainly this is here to be like Jaheira, allowing all of our foods, right, to tap for a green mana. I want to talk about a couple combos. So the first is going to be a non-deterministic combo, or a deterministic combo. By that I mean this is not infinite technically because you can stop it at any time. But there are, to my knowledge, 3 creatures in the deck. I'm just going to show 2 of them. That whenever a counter is put on them, you can make a token. Sorry. So you need Rosie Cotton and any of these 3 creatures out. What you need to do is you just need to make a token anyway. Rosie can do it by coming in, or Rocco's ability goes off. You put a counter on any of these creatures, and they give you the option to make a token. You then make the token, triggering Rosie to put a counter on her creature control. Now, the important thing is that all of this is maze, right? Rosie doesn't have to put the counter back on the thing that you choose to put it on. And for 2 of the 3 creatures we're talking about, making the token is a may. So this, you can do this loop as many times as you want and stop it, or you could just choose to put the counter somewhere out. But realistically, I think what is going to end up making this combo beneficial is somebody plays something on their turn, you have both of these out, and you just make a large number of squirrels. Eldrazi spawns with Basking Brute Scale, or Herd Bailiff makes beast tokens. So again, you have the option to just make a bunch of tokens. And the key thing is, even if neither of these said, even if they all said you have to make the token, remember, Rosie's where you're choosing to put the counter. So you don't have to put the counter on these creatures, but if you do, right, you can make a bunch of tokens. One of the other key combos with Nuka-Cola is Peregrine Took, right? So Peregrine Took, right, whenever you make tokens, you make that many tokens plus an additional food. And then you could sack 3 foods to draw a card. Remember that Nuka-Cola says whenever you sacrifice a food, you make a tapped treasure. Well, Peregrine's going to sack 3 foods to draw a card. Nuka-Cola says, hey, you just sacrificed 3 foods. I'm going to make 3 treasures, but they're all individual treasures being made. So Peregrine's going to make you additional food each time you make those 3 treasures. Now you've netted 3 tapped treasures and drawn a card, and you have 3 more foods to draw a card again. Basically, you could go as deep as you want. You can make a ton of treasures, right? You can do this on your opponent's turn to end up drawing, starting your turn with a bunch of treasures and a bunch of cards in your hand. Again, not an infinite combo because you still have to take the actions, and it relies on both the pieces being out, but can really let you dig through your deck to get to the things you want to get to. But I've said it before on the show, and I'll say it again. No deck's ever complete. Although we've talked about Rocco on the channel before, and we're updating him again. I think going into testing, there's still some things we can look at. Do we want to look into more abilities like Abs and Falconer that can give all our creatures the counters on them and ability? make them even better. Give them flying, first strike, lifelink. There's so many abilities you can give them. I love Atali. It's such a fun card. I just couldn't fit it into where I wanted it in the deck. Coming in and getting to cast a bunch of spells from everybody off the top for free is a very interesting card. And then I didn't really go into the impulse draw cards like Light Up the Stage or all these cards that exile the top two and you could play them. I think they're even better in a deck like this. I think what I tried to do was try to create as many value engines from Rocco when we and our opponents play their things. But I could see why throwing in, Light Up the Stage, Rob the Archives, I could see why it would be beneficial if you want to just rely on yourself as opposed to relying on your opponents. But from my experience watching my friend play his Rocco deck is that a lot of times you're going to tempt your opponents into playing the things that they exile because they're fully aware that if they don't play it, it's gone. And I think the urgency is going to create enough value off the things being exiled. But let's do what we love to do on the channel the most and get into our playtest. Remember, the goal of playtest on our channel is not to find magical Christmas land. It's not just to show off all our best plays, but it's to get in some gameplay scenarios and kind of understand, what hands we're looking at and how we're going to set up our game plan. Here we've got a 3-lander. We got the Farseek in case we need to go get a red source. But if any of our opponents are playing red, then the Exotic Orchard's pretty good. We got the Basking there. Whenever you put a counter on it, you make a spawn. Remember, right, good for Rocco putting that and getting you the spawns. Remember, the spawns sack for colorless mana. And then Path. Well, there's the mountain, so never mind. What makes the most sense? I was going to say, I think Pia into Rocco makes the most sense to me. So now Rocco is going to go off. I'm just going to put what we exile here. We have a Faldhorn that we could play now. I mean, we want to play it, right? We don't want to lose it. It's a nice way to get counters. So I'll play it. When I play it, I get a Thopter. And then Rocco goes off. I'll put the counter on itself. Make the food. Now that's pretty great, right? We've got Faldhorn. Now note that around that table, we could have gotten more value. Like we could have had people cast their things and had extra counters on Rocco. I'm not going to simulate that, but it could be something that could happen. Awkward to leave the mana up, but again, I'm not really hating this right now. Again, we might just end up with more foods. Oops, sorry. That would be our exile this turn, right? Is Rampage of the Clans. So now as we come to our turn, we have Rampage of the Clans. Right now it's only having 2. But, I mean, there could be a world where our opponents are casting their things. Maybe we have 5 or 6 foods, and we just plan to rampage before our turn and hit a bunch of centaurs, right? This could be one of those scenarios where it just depends on what our opponents have done. I love the idea of something like Ginny Fae. Like, if we're not going to do this, I love the idea of something like Ginny Fae to be able to make, some regular creature tokens, right, instead of food tokens if we want to do that. I think this is probably my plan. I don't see a world where we don't do that. Maybe we leave up something like Path, right, just to protect our board. And remember, it's till our next end step. So we have a whole turn cycle before our turn, right, where we get to play it. So I'd probably just play it on one of my opponent's turns. And I have a gut feeling we probably have 4 or 5 foods right now, plus the Thopter. I'm well willing to give them up, make 6 centaurs, and then we're just in good shape. We get the wolf, we get the Thopter again. Actually, the Thopter would get sacrificed from Pia to the Rampage because it's on cast, so that's even better. And I think we're in decent shape there. We've got some other pieces that we could continue to get in. But again, sometimes it's a little awkward when you can't exactly simulate what your opponents are going to do or how you're going to interact, depending on what they do. But I think the Rampage is a perfect example of just use it, get the centaurs in, and then, keep profiting from there. Place number 2 here, we see Pia again. We've got a 3-lander with that Generous Pup, Generous Gift, and then Innkeeper's Talent to hand out counters. Ooh, Warden of the Grove is an interesting draw. Both Monastery and Bridge are coming in tapped, aren't they? So I think we kind of got to step up the logjam. So we're going to hideaway 4 here on the Bridge, or we can cast that thing for free as long as we have 10 or more power. I kind of like the Scalds. These other 3 I think are kind of not something I'd want to do mid to late game. I'd love to get the pup down, but if I do that, I'm pretty much taking next turn off. But if I do this, I'm taking this turn off. So it's kind of one of these awkward, like, do I hope I hit a land next turn? you know, kind of like the idea of the pup and just hope we hit an untapped land. We didn't, so that is what it is. But we get the town in, put a counter on the pup, at least get that process started. Or we could play the party thrasher. I guess either way. The Thrasher might be fun in the sense that now we might have a better chance to help convoke whatever Rocco gets triggered. So maybe that makes more sense. Coming to our next turn, no lands. So I think we just play the Rocco. Exile the end of turn is a Rootbound Crag. So now, anytime anyone plays something on their turn from Exile, we just put the counter on the pup and it goes on everything else. So let's just say it happened once. One of our opponents plays their thing. Well, I'll play my Rootbound Crag, put a counter on the pup, and it goes on the rest of them, right? So that only happens once per turn. So now if I cast something else from Exile or whatever, right, the pup doesn't pass out the counter again. But the point is we got what we needed. I love the idea of the Grove. Stridehanger could start making us Thopters, which feels pretty ideal. And then, because I think inevitably I missed the Party Thrasher trigger, but I don't think I would have done it this turn. I think we can take some attacks, and then let's see what we get. We see Flawless Maneuver. Perfect, right? We can cast it for free because we control Rocco. I have a gut feeling probably somebody gave us at least one counter, right? Which means a Thopter and a food. Remember that you make the food and the counter at the same time, so that Thopter would get a counter because the pup would trigger after the counter's been put on. And if somebody tries to wipe the board, we have the Flawless, which could trigger it again. Again, I'm just going to assume at minimum one person has done it, but again, I probably expect that it's more than that. So we come to our next turn, play the land. We have the Flawless, which we just need to play this turn if we haven't played it already. I love the idea of trying to go into the Scalds just to get some more access out of our hand, or we could go Innkeeper's Talent, right? Try to protect the board a little bit more. I'm just trying to think of what makes the most sense. I don't want to lose the Scald. Oh, I don't lose the Scalds. That's right. It's under the Mosswort Bridge. I've got 4. I've got plenty to activate the bridge. My thought is, I do it. It's just 1 mana, right? So I'd have 3 mana left, and then I can still convoke for these cards. So the cards I'm seeing is Annie Joins Up, Facebreaker, Jetmir's Garden, and a Forest. Playing that from Exile with the Mosswort Bridge would trigger again. Put it on the pup. Get everywhere else. Thopter food. Again, the Thopter is going to be able to help with Convoke, because remember that Convoke is an ability that's tapping the creatures for the spell, so it gets around haste, which is really nice. Joins Up feels really good, and I do have access to all 3 of my colors, so I think Joins Up is probably the next choice to play right away. That gets me a Scald. Scald doesn't go off till next turn, but this does trigger Rocco. I guess just counter on itself, Thopter food. And whenever it comes in, it deals 5 damage to a target creature, planeswalker. And he won't double up Rocco's trigger because Rocco's trigger is on cast, right? I could. Can I convoke the Facebreaker out? Yeah, 1, 2, 3. I could convoke the Facebreaker out, get more triggers. And I think now we're in decent shape. I think we're kind of getting to that nice board position where it's just going to come down to, the semantics of getting into the right place. Playtest number 3, only a 2-laner, but got lots of 2-mana ramps, so we're in okay shape for sure. Play the Cinderglade in turn 1 tapped. Sunpetal Grove, and I think we just crack the Nature's Lore. Go for the Garden. This is an interesting point. Do you get something like Warden of the Grove down first? Do you get Rocco down first? It kind of makes me wonder what makes more sense, because I don't want to just hand my opponents cards, right, without being able to profit too much. It probably feels like the wrong choice, but I'm going to Warden. Back to our turn. Oh, not getting the land wasn't ideal. Because I can't Rampant Growth and... I can't Rampant Growth or Farseek and play this. So I think I'm forced to probably play Rocco now. Put the counter on it. End of turn is a mountain. Okay. So that's probably more ideal now that we can start playing lands. Got to play the one from Exile, right? We don't want to lose the... We don't want to lose the land. I don't mind the Smithy. Automaton just feels right. Take advantage right of those Thopters for our opponents playing their things. End of the turn, it's a Plains. Play the Plains. Sorry, might as well put the counters on that Thop there. And again, now the engine's going. We're making the Thopters when we're doing that. I think it's just right. It's the Pup. And I'd say maybe Faldhorn. Or I guess you could ramp again, but I guess we could go Lelia, but I kind of think it's the Faldhorn. And then now, right, the Pup, when it comes in and I put a counter on it with Warden of the Grove, it would hand a counter to all of these, right? So that when Faldhorn comes in, it would be able to get 5 counters, right? And then, Exile. And again, I think we're in a good spot. Board wipes aside, right? We're getting Thopters when people are playing stuff from the foods, and then, Generous Pups growing the board every time it happens. And I think we're just in good shape from there. I mean, if somebody wipes the board, we at least have a way to rebuild. We've got the Smithy, we've got Ramp still. I think we've still got some relevant pieces, although at that point we'd be looking to kind of transition towards combat, right? Playtest number 4 here, keeping a 3-lander with Cultivate. Great. We see Rosie, we see an Impicall. Rosie and an Impicall are a really fun combo because an Impicall making the gnomes could put more counters on an Impicall, right? And then Clever Concealment for some potential protection. Again, Canopy, or do the Crag, then the Plains. Nothing I can do on 2. If our opponent has any of our 3 colors, this could be a Rocco. I almost feel like it's a Nymphicall just to get started. Oh, of course we missed the land for the Ouroboros. That's just brutal. I think I have to cultivate now. I have to cultivate now since I'm slightly behind. Get a forest, and I'll get a 2 white, 3 green, 2 red. I'll go get another white source. And I can play that for turn since I didn't play land. That's just brutality. I kind of wish we would have. Nymphicall can attack if I have the attack line for it, but I'm probably going to assume we don't. Now, getting Rocco down feels right. But I almost feel like Ouroboros putting the counter on, trying to get a counter, making a couple gnomes. Now I kind of wonder, did we take the wrong line? Right? I think now it's Rocco. Play the Idol of Oblivion. Go to combat, 2 counters on everything because of the Ouroboros. Right? Attack, make a bunch of gnomes. Draw off the Idol of Oblivion. And Party Thrasher is our card. We do have some, the Exile. We do see there's some of the Impulse Draw on the Ren's Resolve. I think it's just Rosie here. It comes in, makes me a food. I'll put the counter on Nymphicall. I play the Party Thrasher. I actually think I try to leave up Clever Concealment, actually, because I think we need to protect the board. Go to combat. Everybody gets 4 counters because of Ouroboros. And then, a Nymphicall attacks, making a ton of gnomes. Rosie Cotton gets to just spread those counters out. We draw a card off the Idol of Oblivion. Play that land main 2. Again, put them on Nymphicall, put them on Ouroboros. I don't think the counters really matter. Just spread them out however you want. But we have the white creatures back. My thought for Rosie Cotton was tap these 3. I'd have at least 1 white source up. and then leave up enough creatures basically to be able to tap for the Idol of Oblivion or tap for the Clever Concealment. That at least protects the board in case somebody tries to wipe it, and then it comes back to our turn and we can just Damning Verdict to get everything out of the way. Nimbicol would be making if we just put all of the counters onto Ouroborite, I think that just gets particularly brutal next turn if nobody can remove us more than once because of the Clever Concealment. Because Rocco's an 8 right now. Putting all counters on Ouroborite would make him a 9. Like a 19, basically making Rocco one shot on somebody, and then between our other creatures and all the gnomes, I think we'd just be able to knock everybody else out. Again, we have one protection piece in Clever Concealment, and remember, Clever would phase out all the gnomes as well, so the gnomes would still be able to attack the Inimicol Maid unless they died. But again, this is just one of those scenarios where you get a couple cards that work really well together that can set up their own little value engine. But I'd love to know, what do you think of Rocco down in the comment section below? I think there's a lot of things that could be done to make the deck better, obviously, but I kind of like the way that these pieces work together. It's fun to see you enticing your opponents with things and being able to pay them off in such a weird, quirky way. This is one of those commanders I've always had fun playing against, because you inevitably get that question of, do I really want to play the thing that you forced me to exile that I really want and willing to give you your triggers and all your stuff, or do I let those cards go, right, and lose key pieces? So it's a really interesting deck. Like, it really can depend on the people you're playing with as well. But let me know what you think of Rocco down in the comment section below, and I will catch you all in the next.